Good afternoon. Welcome to the New York State ASBIL webinar, The Purchasing Process, Agents, Procedures, Standards, and Specifications. Your presenter today is Angela Pierce. If anyone has any questions for Angela at any time during the presentation, you have two options. First option is you can use the chat pane located to the right-hand side of your screen, or on your telephone keypad, you can hit 7#. That'll notify me as the moderator that you have a question. I'll then break into the webinar and put you through. At this time, Angela, it's all yours.
Thank you, Matthew. Welcome, everyone. This afternoon, we're going to be speaking about this purchasing process, leaping off from the last webinar with more detail on some of the specifics of how purchasing happens in the real world. Some of it will be very much in terms of how those laws and standards that were talked about and policies that were talked about previously now are put into effect. As we begin, I want to make everyone aware of some very important concepts that you need to be aware of. To start off, purchasing is an area, multifaceted area, that has a lot of concerns because the purchasing agent is, in fact, in charge of spending a whole lot of money. And that's taxpayer funds has to be protected. And we're going into some more detail in a few minutes. But ethical handling of all the contracts and transaction is kind of tantamount in all of the proceedings that go on the part of a purchasing agent in the purchasing department. Fairness and openness in all bid and quote transactions, keeping procedures standardized so that you know that you're doing the same thing all the time, so that there's a way you can deflect criticism because, in fact, you're not treating anybody in a better way than anyone else. And then to make sure your staff, the vendors, any of your end users, everyone that's involved in purchasing really has an understanding. And that's a job that really falls into the realm of the purchasing agents themselves because they have the knowledge base, which a lot of other people in your organization really don't have, to instruct people on how to perform appropriately. Let's go back and talk just for a moment on the principles of what competitive bidding is all about. That was established as part of General Municipal Law 103 to provide a basis for all recognized and responsible vendors to have an equal opportunity so that they can furnish whatever goods, equipment, services to the district, because the theory is we want to foster as much competition as possible. The theory being the more competition, the better the pricing will be, the more favor will be in the district's realm. You certainly want to favoring one vendor over another because there needs to be a nice, clean, crisp. Your reaction to vendors should not be that they're your friends. They're a partner in your performance of your job, and you don't want any vendor being able to throw a criticism against you that you're friendlier in favoring one vendor over another. You want to also be aware that it keeps the district residents informed on business matters, since financial matters are so keenly able to be discerned on an outsider basis, especially with FOIL laws, the Freedom of Information Act being in existence, that people can get to invoices and what purchase orders actually indicated to make sure that things are going on in a appropriate manner in a school district business office. And definitely they want to prevent fraud on the part of the purchasing official. That's why there are so many checks and balances and bells and whistles in effect to make sure that everything's being done above board. And basically the last piece is that saving money, because you really are attempting to get the best product for the least amount of money that does the job that you need to have done. Who is responsible for purchasing? Well, basically, it falls down to two areas. The purchasing agent is ultimately responsible. That's the person whose signature goes on those purchase orders and that person has to be indicated in order for anything to be valid. But of course then the Board of Education, who is adopting policies indicating how the purchasing process should run, how to deal with purchases under the bidding thresholds, and we're going to talk in lots of detail about that, and the Code of Ethics policy that is established by the Board to help, again, to avoid conflicts of interest on the part of the officers, employees, and particularly speaks to the purchasing agents that we want to make sure everything is done very ethically. And only the Board of Education can award the bids and often sign off on the contracts that the school district is involved in. So those two entities work in a partnership, really, to make sure that everything is done above board. A purchasing agent is appointed annually by the Board of Education. That's usually done at the meeting that's held in July called the reorganization meeting, although it doesn't actually have to be that meeting, but it's kind of typical. And that purchasing agent is named on that resolution so that it's very clear who the person is. Purchasing agent is responsible for maintaining, again, we're talking about ethics and relationships in that area, because the purchasing agent does hold a public trust using taxpayer funds to acquire the best items from the most responsible bidders to fulfill the supply, equipment, and servicing needs of the organization, to avoid the impression of impropriety, to keep a cordial and fair relationship with vendors, creating credibility for the office and a reputation for fairness. You're in a partnership, again, with vendors. They are there to help you get what you need to get done, whether you're buying a pencil or creating a roof. You need to have a cooperative vendor who is going to be able to function in a way that will get the work done that you need to get done. And you do that by being consistent and non-arbitrary in procurement practices, foster payments on a timely basis, and that's a real important one. Many purchasing agents may not have direct relationship with accounts payable, but you should kind of foster that relationship because you want to know if there's a problem with the vendor being paid, if there's some kind of issue that's going on with an end user where they're not signing off on their paperwork and getting it to accounts payable so that someone can be paid in a timely basis. You really don't want to wait until the vendor calls you screaming that they haven't been paid in 120 days and they're never doing business with you again. So having that relationship with accounts payable is going to come up again and again and again. And the purchasing agents will have relationships with all sorts of departments in the entire entity of the government that they're working with. And if you have a problem with the vendor, you have to talk to them and work it out and try and get those issues dealt with before they become major problems for you or the vendor. Which not having your books shipped is a really major problem when your high school is looking for their textbooks in science, as an example. Another very important concept which the Comptroller's Office in the state of New York has noticed from time to time is everyone who's in purchasing should read and follow the Board of Education policy and the regulation on purchasing. Every district should have one. Those of you who are in school districts or BOCES really should have already accessed a copy of it, and you should be able to do that by either gaining access to your policy book or asking the purchasing department. You should be able to see all sorts of information having to do with how you handle purchasing. And then the 104B component, which is the purchasing policy on how to handle those purchases that are under the thresholds of bidding, are very useful in knowing how things are aggregated and how much money drives whether you do a verbal quotation or a written quotation, or when you actually don't have to do a quotation and go to some other mechanism like a state contract. One of the most difficult criticisms to defend is the auditor, especially the state comptroller auditor, not finding the district didn't follow the Board of Education purchasing policy. it's kind of in your backyard, so you really need to be able to know what's on it and how to deal with it. And if there is a problem with something that's in that policy, work towards presenting a more updated, more relevant policy change to the Board of Education. That policy gets reviewed, depends on the district, but it could be annually, it could be on some other time period, but you really want to make sure it's up to date and reflects the current laws as well as the current procedures that make sense for the district and are within those laws. Sometimes we find the policy has been around for a while and it doesn't really reflect the procedures that are in the office. So you want to make sure there's more consistency on that so that you, again, are behaving in an ethical way and really can give an answer to an auditor, to a taxpayer, to whoever is involved in asking the question, that you do things the same way for everybody and it's fair and consistent and the right thing to do for your district. Do not give insider information on bids, vendors, or pricing to assist one vendor in gaining a foothold in winning the bid. And this may sound like it's kind of a no-brainer, but sometimes you don't realize that, you know, you get phone calls in your office and you want your staff to be aware of this. You don't want your staff to get a question like, well, how much did we pay on this bid last time, and have a vendor maybe have some information that other vendors don't have. There are often times in bidding where someone will call and ask for something to be clarified, and if somebody answers the question, first of all, hopefully it's the right answer. Secondly, if it's an answer that helps this vendor but leaves other vendors in the lurch, then that vendor could really be getting more information that could allow them to win the bid. And that's just unfair, and you need to be cognizant of it and make sure that your staff, not only in your office but also outside of the office in the end user areas, your school buildings, your transportation department, knows how to communicate with vendors. Because the other thing that I've found happening in my life when I was working in schools in the 30 years that I spent is that sometimes transportation director would be very helpful. And again, you need to caution them that they need to be directing questions about bids back to the purchasing office and back to you pretty much, or a very trusted employee, to make sure these answers are appropriate and that if you're answering things that need to be made, all the vendors need to be made aware of, that you send an addendum with that updated information to everybody, and then everybody's standing on the same foot. I hope this isn't sounding too redundant, but your actions in training district staff in the procedures that illustrate good public purchasing and the Board of Education process really, really, really does make a difference. And I've done that for many years and found that most of the time, and I do really sincerely mean most of the time, people really want to know how to do things correctly. And you get your odd person who wants to circumvent how to get, $20,000 worth of material broken into 5,000 increments so that they don't have to bid. But for the most part, people want to know about it. So organizing a workshop to train people to discuss certain areas that are a particular issue or particular changes in procedure, when a new law comes out, changing something that you've been doing in the past, you want to get that information out. I used to even put some information together in a packet that people could take back with them on state contracts or on BOCES contracts if we're involved in a BOCES bid, so they had something in hand that they could actually really resort to if they had a question. Sometimes the auditor's criticisms are training tools. Certainly the Board of Education policy is a training tool, and that's something to share with those other people in the district who need to know how to do things correctly. Purchasing people who are very new certainly can look towards organizations like New York ASBO and an organization called New York SAMPO, which is the New York State Association of Municipal Purchasing Officers. They have a training programs as well as NASBO but their training programs are very specifically in the area of purchasing. There's a conference once a year, as NASBO has, that gives people the opportunity to network with other people, meet vendors from across the state, but there are fees involved, not only in joining, but also in some of the conferences. There are going to be fees in conferences, as well as some of the training sessions that are involved. But the money is very worthwhile because you are really getting a lot more information than isolated purchasing in your own district, where you're really pretty much the only person can get you. It's a very good thing to be able to get kind of up-to-date information immediately. And then keep aware of changes in the law and auditor issues to use this information to tighten what you're doing and making sure that everything is going well. As again, you are really the expert when it comes to the purchasing in the district and need to be able to make other people aware of what's going on. Another area where the purchasing agent often has their hand in, if not control over, is property management in the sense of maintaining and monitoring inventory controls over goods and equipment received. And that's not to say that you are necessarily going to have one big warehouse where you're going to know where everything is and hand it out and then know where everything ends up. This may be done with you having other people who are involved, custodial staff, clerical staff, teachers, who are inputting into where everything is. Because as part of our legal requirements, we need to be able to know and put as part of, it gets to be part of our annual review in a school district, exactly what has happened to our inventory, what depreciation has affected it, and basically that we know where it is, and when it is determined to be obsolete or broken or discardable, that the board has actually resolved to get rid of the materials in question, and then that information is then forwarded to the people who are getting rid of it, either by selling it at surplus or putting it in the garbage, so that it's all trackable. Again, because we're in the business of using taxpayer funds. It's not our own money. We need to be able to talk about what happened and have a very, very specific paper trail. Documentation is the byword of what we do. So documentation is always going to be an issue in the purchasing realm. Now we're going to actually step back and look at the entire purchasing function from start to finish. Purchasing is normally centralized in the position of the purchasing agent. That may still mean that there's going to be other people that are involved in doing some of the pieces of it, maybe getting some of the quotes, but certainly bids and anything having to do with signing the purchase order is clearly and fixed in the purchasing agent's realm. Let's take it from the top. Somebody has a need. The end user is looking for some pencils or for some office supplies or for some textbooks. They put together a requisition. That request for the supplies or equipment or whatever is then sent over to the purchasing agent. The purchasing agent is looking at this as the official request for the supplies or services. And then they're going to review it and ultimately acquire it. And that's the number of steps that we're going to be starting to talk about, how that actually gets done. The purchasing agent is going to review the item requested and perhaps look at what the person's asked for and make sure it's specified in a way that would be meaningful in the acquisition process, i.e., that somebody actually gave out enough information. To say that you want some pencils and not really be specific. If you're looking for golf pencils, which are a small pencil, you're not going to be happy with getting a regular number 2 regular size pencil. So you need to make sure your end user is actually specifying what they need. Sometimes it's not as as simple even as a pencil. You have much more complicated specifications that are based on a need that may be in a realm that's technologically supported, and you want to get more information. The more information you get that can tell you exactly what you're going to be buying, the better you are at being able to get what the person needs. The purchasing agent is going to be the one who prepares the bid or quotation document, sometimes depending on that monetary threshold, which we'll keep talking about, to acquire a competitive price, since we are, again, talking about public funds payments. And when they provide that bid, the documentation that's going to need to go out is going to have some information in it that's going to be very meaningful. Next webinar, we're going to be speaking about the actual contracts and what's in the contract. But the documentation should have, at a minimum, the item specification, which is the item description, an estimated quantity that's needed. When referencing a catalog number, it's good to put the catalog information on there if you can. If that's not possible, then the manufacturer information would be useful, but it's not required, and we're going to go in when we talk about specifications as to how that detailing can go so that it's meaningful. But you also want to include the date and time by which the vendor's response to the bid and quote will be received. And that becomes very, very important, especially in bidding, because that's very, very official, and you want to make sure that that time is met. The indication as to whether the bid will be awarded on an item-by-item, a group basis, or a total bid basis is information the vendor needs in order to make sure their pricing is appropriate to what you're looking for, and also is trying to make sure that the information is clear so that everyone's on the same page. There should also be some packing, delivery, package marking information, something that tells people how is it going to be delivered. So in doing this process, the purchasing agent has to make sure that the bid is properly advertised. And we talked a little bit about that last time, and we will talk about it a little bit more later on. Sealed bids are received. When they are, timestamp them in, record them, and make sure they're kept in a safe place until the date and time of opening. You certainly don't want to misplace them, and you certainly don't want to have any possibility that other vendors would have access to them, since that would be certainly a concern in the area of collusion, that people might see something and try and contact somebody else to fix a price, or just be, undercutting someone because they saw their price. So you certainly don't want to be in any position to have any criticism of that nature sent your way. Any of the certified or bank checks that are received or bid bonds that are considered bid security have to be examined for accuracy and recorded, and then they have to be placed in a safe place too, to make sure that they're not mistakenly put somewhere which would compromise their going back to the vendor when that vendor is either, I shouldn't say disqualified, not awarded the bid, or has completed their contract and is going to get their bid security back because they have completed the contract. And bids then would also have to be checked and analyzed, and this does fall in the realm of the purchasing agent himself or herself, for compliance with the specification and the laws. It has to be a response that is appropriate to what we're governed by, and also the specifications have to be met. And then we're going to talk in great detail about how that can happen. Now that was really a discussion mainly about how our bids going to be handled. If a quotation is needed, quotes are going to be a little bit different because they're not handled with all the releasing bid security and releasing a legal notice and all of that sort of stuff. So when you get a request for items that can be quoted, you want to detail the item so that if you're sending it as a written quote, you can get the vendors to understand exactly what you're wanting. Set a date for the information to be faxed back or emailed back, or if you're making a phone quote, you need to give them some time. You could say, well, I need the information within close of day tomorrow, and name the date so it's clear. And then you want to check those quotations for compliance with what your requirements are, what your spec indicated, and compare them on a unit price and terms and delivery basis. Because as you're doing a quotation, you may have, if you have a need that is a concrete delivery time frame, and you have 4 quotes that are received, and one of the vendor can ship it within the week that you needed it in, and the other vendors can't ship within, that may be the vendor you go with, even though they're not the lowest quote. Normally you go with the lowest quote as long as all the rest of the terms and delivery are the same, and the compliance with the spec is there. I do want to mention it's always important to check the vendor computations on any documentation that you're getting pricing-wise, where there's a multiplier and things that needed to be added, because I can't tell you how many times vendors can't add or subtract. I'm sorry, not subtract, add or multiply. They may be able to subtract, but you can't always tell. And you really need to make sure that not only are you basing your decision on correct numbers, but that you're basing your decision on correct numbers and the board gets the correct information. So this is true even if you're dealing with bids where you don't have a computerized pricing sheet where you could maybe trust that Excel is doing it. A good rule of thumb is you might want to spot check things. And if you have any question or concern about it, it's better to add it up and make sure it's right than to make an error and then find out that some other vendor is going to come and tell you, well, we were at the bid opening and we added his stuff up and it was wrong and you took his low bid. So you don't want to be in that position if you can avoid it. Then once the bid is analyzed and tabulated, that basically adds up all those numbers and makes sure you have exactly what items are going to what vendors. You're going to prepare some kind of document in your district, an award recommendation that goes to the Board of Education. Ultimately, it may be sent to your business official, it may be sent to the superintendent of schools, and then they put it to the board agenda. But basically, it's the recommendation that goes to the board as to who should be awarded what items. And in that also, you often are asked to indicate who was in the decision-making process, and that always includes the purchasing agent and often does include other departmental members, supervisors, transportation supervisor, facility supervisor, people who have reviewed what was going on and are in agreement that this is where you want to go in terms of the award. Quotation outcomes are normally not forwarded to the Board of Education unless required by your policy. So as we're talking, I think you can see that there are a lot of decisions that have to be made, that rules that have to be followed, but there are going to be differences from one district to another based on your own culture, basically. After that, after the board has made their formal award, a purchase order can be prepared, and that would indicate the place and time of delivery. It would include a department or person, especially within your larger buildings. You don't really want a high school getting a box that says high school and then trying to guess whose items they were, unless you have a very good custodian handling that kind of thing who has access to the purchase orders in general. But for the most part, you want to make sure you have some detail information on there. You want to reference the bid number or quote or whatever the state contract number is or BOCES bid, because ultimately that's all information that people are going to look for. Certainly a purchasing agent wants to see that information's on there, but also auditors in all of their different permutations are going to be looking for that reference and often looking for an attachment to the purchase order that reflects that pricing area. So your bid number can lead them to a file. The quote, if it's numbered or referenced in some way, can lead them to a file. BOCES information should be somewhere where they can access it to see, how you got that, derived that price. Often state and county contracts are just attached to the purchase order, at least those pages that are referenced, so that they're there for the auditor to review. And the purchase order should also have, of course, the quantity and unit package of the item. That means if you're going to be buying 5 dozen of say, pencil, that you want to then put 5 dozen and then an indication of the specific description of the item, pencil with a catalog number or a vendor number or something that tells the vendor or describes fully exactly what it is. The quoted bid price and delivery, the quoted or bid price and delivery cost, if they're not in one bundle. Usually in bids, they're already, the bid price is including delivery. In quotes, however, lots of times the delivery cost is indicated separately, and you want to make sure they're both on your purchase order. Any packing and marking instructions that you need to make, the method of shipment, if you, especially if you have a particular kind of shipment. Often the method of shipment is best way, so you really don't have to put any specifics in there, but if you needed something FedEx or UPS, you could indicate that. The terms, especially if there's a cash discount, some school districts are able to take care of take advantage of a cash discount, but that would have to be something that's offered by the vendor, and if you pay within 5 days, you'll get 10% off. And if you're looking for that, that should be on the purchase order. And of course, the accounting code or codes used for the encumbrance. So before a purchase order is ever signed off by a purchasing agent, it needs to have money already deducted out of the account code so that there's no question that the money available for that purchase. And in the realm of the purchasing agent, they're really responsible to follow up the purchases are expedited appropriately. In our busy world, in our busy lives, sometimes, especially in a larger school district, and I worked in 2 larger school districts in my past, you really may not have time to always review what the delivery time frames are in terms of knowing if your vendors are delivering. But once in a while, it's good to check and see what's going on. If there's a vendor who, you put out your purchase orders in July and it's now October, and you're looking at a report that tells you that there's no deliveries made across the board, you want to step in and you want to see what's going on. You also want to step in if somebody calls you and says, I need help with this. We really need this right away. We didn't realize that we should have ordered it 2 months ago. Could you help us with seeing to get the vendor to expedite the delivery? And so you step in and try and help out with that too. Ultimately, you need to be sure that the vendor invoice and the purchase order information agree. And if they don't, there has to be some steps that are taken to make sure that you deal with a discrepancy. There should be a relationship, and we talked about this previously, with accounts payable, where if there is a mismatch, there's some procedure to follow. I know in my last district I had an actual manual on how this kind of gets handled, and made sure that the accounts payable clerks involved came to me when there were differences in price, and it was resolved either with purchasing or by the accounts payable clerk calling the vendor and saying, sorry, buddy, we're not paying this. This is a bid price, and we're going to pay our bid price, and that's where we're at. So there are lots of things that can happen in the processing of a purchase order that may not be exactly what one expects, but one does not want to have an order to pick up that there's payments that are made that are inappropriate, or to the wrong vendor, or to vendors that were were changed in some ways. You don't want to change the vendors on purchase orders. That's one of the big no-nos in processing a purchase order. If you have to, get the vendor to resubmit the invoice in the appropriate vendor name, or sometimes we've had to cut a new PO because there's been a change of vendor because of a failure of one contractor to deal with something, and to do it cleanly, we've actually created another purchase order and documented why it was done. You want to make sure those goods that are received are in good condition. They are not broken pieces of pens, and in the quantity and as well as quality that was originally requested. And that, again, may not be done by you directly, but you need to be able to train the people who are involved in doing that, often the clerical staff in different locations, that they need to see what they've purchased, and if it doesn't match the brand that's on the purchase order, that they need to make the vendor aware that they are not accepting that, or call purchasing and let them know what's going on, and we'll make them aware we're not purchasing that, we're not accepting it, so that there is a clear-cut understanding that just because something is bid doesn't mean that you process and acquire inappropriate or inferior materials, because that kind of doesn't make any sense. If you're buying a cleaning solution that is already diluted and it seems cheaper, that doesn't make any sense when you go to realize that the less diluted item is less expensive when you start to use it. So there's lots of judgments that go into how you make your determinations as to what you're going to buy. So you certainly don't want to, when you receive it, take something that's inferior in quality. And then, of course, because the vendors are looking for money in order to buy goods so that they can sell them to you, you want to make sure those vendor claims are processed as expeditiously as possible so that you can get more goods and you don't have to hear the horrible phrase, we're not shipping anything else to your school district until you pay us for blah, 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 because that becomes a real problem, and it's not a good relationship that you're fostering with the vendor. When you're determining the purchasing method, and this is another area of the purchasing process that you really want to be able to know exactly how you're going to buy something. Well, the first step in knowing that is really to determine, well, what kind of stuff is this, and is this requisition and this requisition and this requisition all the same stuff? Okay, how do you determine that? Well, you want to group the like items together. Items that are of same or similar nature, which are usually handled in the marketplace by the same vendors. That's considered the group of items that you're going to put out to bid. So, as an example, if I'm looking for a cleaning solution that I would normally get from Johnson Wax, and I'm looking for a floor wax that I normally get from Johnson Wax being a manufacturer, and then somebody else is looking for a polishing solution that is they want to get from Johnson Wax. Well, you've got kind of your information very clearly set in front of you because they're all Johnson Wax items. So whoever sells the kinds of items that clean and polish and wash floors would be the kinds of vendors that you would buy this from. Then you would want to make sure that they're the vendors you send a contract to and add all these items up so that you know that it's going to cost, well, an estimated, $27,000, and therefore that's going to tell you need to bid because it's over the $20,000 bidding threshold for items that are purchase items. In work type items, service area, you'd be looking at, well, if I'm going to do concrete work at one building and then I need to do a concrete patch in another building and there's now a third patch at a third building, well, those are all going to be put together. Even if you're going to do the third patch 3 months from now, you need to put them together because aggregately over the course of time, i.e. a year or your fiscal year, you're going to have a total that's over the bid threshold, in that case of $35,000, then you need to make sure that you're putting out a bid document, not a quote document. You don't want to ever break up items artificially to appear to buy smaller contracts. And please be aware that there are people in the district still who don't realize, and maybe are not even doing it on purpose, are just not able to plan as well as they should. And they may make a purchase today and then have to make that same purchase a few weeks from now or a month from now. And as you start to see that coming up, you want to kind of intercede and say, hey, what else are you going to be buying of this nature in the next year? And have them give you the entirety of that and see whether it gets into that bidding or quoting threshold, and do the whole Megillah at the same time so that you're protected by the rules that you have to undergo. A good point to know is that when you're dealing with a labor contract, public works contract, they call them lots and lots of different things, but you have to use the bidding threshold that reflects the predominance of the services or the purchase item cost. For instance, if you're dealing with buying, you want to have your walls painted. If the painting, which is the labor cost, that's normally the predominance of the cost, the service of doing that job. The paint itself is a piece of the cost, but it's not the mainstay of the cost. Then you really want to treat it as a service cost. Or if you're installing $15,000 worth of desks, but you're really only having the vendor maybe charge a labor placement cost of 10%, then that's considered to be a purchase item cost, not a service cost, and you would go with the bidding threshold of purchases, the $20,000. So as we've talked about before, the thresholds are very specific. $20,000 for supplies or equipment, $35,000 for service installations where there's, a cost that the labor is going to be predominant. And then you would bid. But now we're going to talk about what happens if you're not bidding. What's the process of that? Because you need to know, I'd say 90% of what you do physically is really the day-to-day purchases. Usually the bids are done on an annual basis. You get them done. You're really going to be utilizing them for the course of many months to come. But every day something comes up, and you want to be able to look and see if there's something that you're going to have to do some more buying on. If you can buy it from something that already does exist and is still valid, that's perfect. But you may not. So we're going to talk about how we deal with all that stuff. Of course, your Board of Education policy is going to tell you at what number you start to do what mechanism of verbal quoting or written quoting. Certain, thresholds, especially if the Board of Education policy has been changed to $20,000 and $35,000, now are going to be there's a certain amount that you're not going to have to bid or quote at all. Usually a very nominal amount. Then if it's $1,000, I'm making the numbers up because each district will have their own take on this. $1,000 to $8,000, you're going to be doing a verbal quote. From $8,000 to $19,999, you're going to be doing a written quote. you need to know which one you're doing, and it has to be based on what your anticipated cost is going to be. You would then consult a potential vendors list that you would have culled together from previous work that was done. If you've had this job done before by a vendor or a couple of vendors, you want to at least, if you like their work, you want to include them on the list that you would send a quote to or call. You want to get recommendations from others that are satisfied with their use of a vendor. You certainly would want to look at state or county contractors and see if they're who they are, and use them for this kind of work in your own district. And you also there's a development that we often do. I think every district has a standardized list of bids that we have vendor names for, because we do the annual bids every year, and we update those lists as we need to, and vendors contact us and say, hey, I'd like to sell you blah, 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 and you put their name on the list, and then when you have a bid or you have a quote, you send it out to them, and you get some kind of response back to them, and then start to create this relationship. Now, that would be great if you don't have to bid and you need to do your own quoting. But there are times when you're not going to need to do bidding or quoting because you have access to whatever the end user's requisitional need is, and you can buy it off a New York State contract, for instance. Certainly there is a huge amount of buying that goes on in New York State. Their areas are on the major breakdown: commodities, services, and technology products. I've given you here the information on how to get to the website that would tell you what the directories are for those three areas, and give you all sorts of inroads as to different kinds of areas that you might find a contract under, and then you can do the research to see if that particular item is available under that contract. That works a lot of times. There's also an indication here of the Green Cleaning Supplies website. There's a separate area that OGS in New York State has established so that you can go directly to an area that talks about those products that are considered green and sanctioned by the state. Certainly county contracts. There are many, many county contracts in New York State for purchases. Certain contracts could be available for service based on whether the county board has actually authorized participation by school districts. And you certainly want to investigate those, because if you can buy some window cleaner off of a county contract, why would you do your own quote? It's already been done on a larger scale. You have a vendor, you have a price, you have everything pretty much ready to go. The only thing I'll say is that I didn't try to put county website access information because each county does it a little differently. Certainly you want to tap into your own county, the county that you reside in, and your neighboring counties, because that would be kind of the fastest way of getting vendors that are local. But certainly New York State law allows us to contact anybody in the state, and that sometimes becomes very helpful. We also have the preferred sources, and I have to correct on a slide I did on the last webinar, I included the county and state as preferred sources, but in reality the term is usually used for basically three, maybe four, and I'm going to talk about the three of them, preferred sources in New York State where they prefer you to go to them first, and that's Courtcraft, New York State Industries for the Blind, the Industries for the Blind of New York State, and the New York State Industries for the Disabled, because they have already by law indicated that these three areas are you should go to first. The only problem that I've ever had, and I mentioned it in the first webinar, is that sometimes their pricing is very high, or their delivery requirements are such that they want you to buy a dozen packages of whatever they're because of the way they package it, whatever they're selling, and you may not need that much. And we've established that the law will allow us, if it's a 15% difference, or the packaging doesn't fall within our purview to be able to access, that we would not have to actually buy from them directly, and we could, buy under our own bid or a state contract. Well, actually, they're not usually always under state contract, but there are some things that are supported. And so I've given you the core craft information and website, as well as Industries for the Blind and New York State Industries for the Disabled. And we did do some discussion on them last time. Well, there are other times when you may not be quoting or bidding, and that's because you're preparing yet another document called an RFP. A request for proposal is a document that is issued when competitive bidding is not the sole criterion of the award of the contract. And in reality, you're in an area, especially by policy or by law, that doesn't require that you actually do a competitive bid. By that I mean that you're dealing with professional services, a very specialized IT installation that includes labor and software and wiring, and it may not be something you can break apart that easily and deal with separately. And it may be also something where you are attempting to have someone give you the methodology by which you are going to have the work done to your basic need. And I'm going to just talk about that for another second. By that I mean you are you're not trying to get a specification out there that is so complete that I absolutely need it done this way on these days and with all this stuff involved. You're asking them to tell you, how am I going to get this problem solved? I need to have a completed room with 25 computers, and the wiring has to be complete, and I need somebody who is in the area who professionally does this to be able to do it and include this kind of software. And, tell me how you're going to get it done. So the document provides details regarding what you're looking for and the minimum requirements, but it's not going to give them the absolute every detail that they're going to need to do it so that everyone's on the same ground covering it. They're going to have a little leeway in being able to respond to you. But you also have to tell them the evaluation criteria, which is going to be used to determine who is awarded, because they're not going to necessarily be the lowest bidder. So you're going to have some percentage is going to be the plan that they've come up with, a percentage of the decision is going to be the price, a percentage is going to be their level of competence in the field that we're dealing with. How many years they've been in business might be a part of a criteria. It can go on and on. It's just the important thing is actually to let them know what your criteria would be so that you don't really have the possibility of being accused of favoritism or leaning towards a particular vendor. The proposal documents are released to this group of potential vendors. You can also advertise it. It's not required, but you certainly can advertise it and get vendors that way. And then you have the RFP returned, and once the RFP is returned, you open it on the date that is specified as the date for it to be returned, and then you look at the proposals that were sent and start to look at them and review them and determine whether or not you want to call people in to ask more questions, to ask them to give you more information than was in their packet, so that you have some leeway to actually have some discussion. But you don't want to mess with changing prices and changing the scope of what they're doing, because you want it to be appropriate to whatever it is that you're dealing with. But then you use your evaluation to determine who your successful person is. And as I said, it's not only used for professional services like legal or architects or auditors. It's also been used in IT installation, bus route costs, a number of areas. So that you have to just be sure that you're dealing with an area that's not truly a bid area. Cooperative purchasing. Cooperative purchasing has changed a little bit in the last few years because there has been a big drive in New York State to increase the amount of cooperation between entities. It started out the way I'm going to describe right now, where you could have agreements made by 2 or more school districts, and that's fine. They come together and they say, hey, we want to buy fuel oil. Let's all get together. We'll increase the number of gallons of fuel oil. We're going to be buying from a vendor. That contract will look really good to that vendor who is the awardee, and we'll all benefit in some way because we'll all get some kind of positive response from the fact that we're using a larger contract, and everybody involved should be happy. To do that, you need to have approval from all the governing bodies involved. Each participant district must advertise in their own official newspaper. They must award the contract for their own bodies. The Board of Education must deal with it. One school district typically takes the lead position, handles creating the bid document with information from the member districts so that they know where and what and how much, copies the bid, releases the documents, and provides the site for bid opening and then analysis, which could be done by that lead district or by lead districts with input from other member districts. It really depends on what the contract is and the interest on the member district's part. And as I said, it's hopeful that a larger volume purchase will have a cost reduction, which will be happiness for everybody. One of the things that you can't do is you can't not be an original member and then piggyback on like you can on a county contract or a state contract. You have to be a member from the initial legal notice and initial legal requirements that were put in. Now, of course, you could have also gone to BOCES and done the same kind of thing, where BOCES then prepares the specifications or coordinates and awards the bid, and there's usually a fee for that. And BOCES will then, once the bid has been analyzed and awarded, will give the information to the member districts, and they will be able to use it as BOCES pricing. But yet, the last piece that I want to mention is that more recently the push has been to allow 2 or more, well, not only to allow, to foster 2 or more cities, towns, counties, villages, fire districts, school districts, and BOCES to enter into intergovernmental cooperation agreements with the same benefits involved, where you're actually going to be able to get a benefit by doing larger volume buying. And as time progresses, I suspect we'll see lots more of that. The other thing you should know is that because there are so many things that are actually done on an ongoing basis, you don't have to actually do everything from scratch every year. Usually there's a bid schedule or calendar, and there's a whole master list of, and it should be computerized, especially if you've got more than 1,000 pupils, because you're going to need to do this every year. And it's produced for a whole set of commodity areas. I mentioned in the slide art supplies, custodial supplies, but it's normally science supplies. Anything that's going to go over now $20,000 in an initial purchase, but it used to be $10,000, so the lists were created at that point. Those same lists can be then used and the information collected as to what the upcoming need would be as quote documents. So, you don't want to reinvent wheels with a lot of this stuff. You want to try and use things over and over and over again to make sure you're utilizing your time as best you can. We're all really busy, and there's lots going on, and as you can see, there's lots to do. So you want to try and keep a lot of that together. We are certainly going to be looking at those specifications, and I know what I always did is the year that I did something, if a vendor told me that's not being used anymore or that's discontinued, or here's the new part number for that, I would put the manufacturer's part number for that. I would update the specs so that when it went out the next year, that would already be part of it, so that it was constantly being reviewed and updated so that the information was as clean as it possibly can get, because it's a huge amount of data to keep putting out. But the reality is, if your spec is not going to be right, it's going to cause more problems in the long run. The schools, your end user departments usually make a quantity request annually. They put in what they need for the upcoming year. Then it comes to purchasing. All the requests are put together. Then they're printed with the quantities and the documentation of the bid itself. And then that's all sent out with a notification that we need to receive it by a certain date and time, and it gets published in the appropriate paper for your particular school district. And what are we sending out? Creation of the specifications is so important. They have to detail the minimum standard for the item or items required for purchase. But on the other hand, they can't be so tight as to be restrictive, which means that you're putting out a spec that says we only want to buy a Ford, and I'm sorry, I don't know the models in Ford, but a Ford XYZ car, that's the only thing we want to buy, because that's illegal. We cannot specify exactly a brand and name and brand and model of something that is the only thing we will buy. We have to look at alternates, and we're going to talk about in the next couple of minutes what that actually means. Specifications can be fairly simple. You can say tape, cellophane, 3/4 of an inch by 2,592 inches, a roll. We want a quantity of XYZ each. Or crayons, regular, 8 colors per box, 12 boxes per package, and we want to buy X number of packages. That's a really, really simple spec. Even with this really, really simple spec, there's going to be a whole lot of possible different items that would be offered to us, some of which might be inferior to what we're really looking for. I've certainly seen cellophane tape that hardly stuck on a piece of paper. I've seen cellophane tape that was so brittle that when you went to take it off the roll, it would just tear right off in little pieces. Those are not going to be functionally appropriate types of things. However, if you have specifications that are that simple, you may end up not being able to reject some items. You certainly can reject something that starts to break in your hands, but the only reason you could do that is because you acquired a sample. And we're going to talk about that more because you can't acquire samples on every single item you put out to bid. So you want your specs to be as appropriate as possible to get what's needed functionally for your district. You can specify a brand name, and it's understood that the bid response is to be equal or better products or of similar or superior function, purpose, or design, or the performance characteristics. All of those have to be better than what you put out there, and then you can substitute it as an alternate. But when you do that, then you would add to that spec of cellophane tape something like Scotch's, that's 3M 803 tape, which is a certain kind, it has a certain kind of quality and functionality. So when you get in your responses, you may still have to look at your lowest bidders in terms of getting a sample, but then you have to know what your Scotch 803 tape is, and then you can compare these other items to it and indicate on your spreadsheets whether they do or do not meet that specification because they are just not in form and function capable of doing what needs to be done. Or equal is not needed to be specified in every listed specification, but there has to be a notation in the general conditions that says that or equal is assumed in every specification because that is legally what is appropriate. There is one instance where brand name can be specified and be the only item. And I don't mention it lightly because it is done sometimes, but it is done very rarely. And that is when the Board of Education actually specifies that they're going to standardize on a particular item. And it needs a Board of Education resolution, and it really rarely is done because most of the time boards are not interested in just buying Crayola crayons. They have to have a good rationale for wanting to do it. It might be done in an area such as facilities where there might be some time clock, and even there, it's very, very, very obscure, but it can be done if you can convince your board. So you want to look at your specifications, and you want to talk in terms of details. What kind of dimensions or sizes or tolerances does this item have? You want to put that right into the spec. The composition components, even formulas sometimes lend themselves. For dimensions or sizes, for instance, you want to say an 18 by 24-inch artboard. You want to make sure that those sizes are there because there are different sizes. And if you're not specific, you're going to get somebody giving you a response who's going to be giving you a response to a 9 by 12, and the price might be cheaper, but you're not going to get the item that you want. Colors, if they're deemed essential to function. In other words, if you say you want to you want a red pencil, then you want a red pencil. And you should say you want a red pencil. If you want crayons, for instance, you're looking for 12 in a box, red kindergarten size. You don't want to get a box of black ones because you need that for a particular reason. But there are times that color is not going to be appropriate. If it's the only thing that makes the difference between a lawnmower, the one that you have the low bid on is black and the one that you specified was green, that's not deemed essential to function or use or any of that kind of thing. The strength of the product can be an issue. For instance, when you're buying plastic bags, there's a whole issue about how plastic bags hold up, and you want it to be strong enough to be able to hold your garbage. Physical, chemical, or electrical characteristics. If you're getting some kind of chemical, you want to indicate that it's going to have a certain chemical description because there are differences in the same type of chemical but different versions of it, and you don't want to get one version when you need the other. Absorption qualities, that's often used in paper toweling and tissue. Weight of materials. You might need a 50-pound artboard or a 90-pound cardstock, and if the vendor's giving you a lesser poundage, it's going to be lighter. Or even a higher poundage, it may not suit what you're using it for. So you need to be able to put those into the spec so that if you do have a question, you can go to the vendor and say, hey, your price is very, very low. Is there something you can tell me about your item, like what's the poundage of it, what's the size, and you'll be able to investigate more appropriately exactly what's going on with the materials that you're acquiring. Materials and method of construction. You really need to specify that when you're going out to bid. You don't want the vendors to assume that we all know what kind of concrete you're talking about. There are lots of levels of concrete and lots of components of concrete, and you want to be as specific as possible. And it's certainly, I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying the purchasing agent needs to know all the details of this by themselves. They need to be not only brilliant but also read minds. No, this is all done with input from other sources, from the end users, from the requisitioners, from the people who are in facilities who are going to talk, to talk to the vendors and know the product and really kind of tell you what kinds of needs they're having. And without that, it's not going to work because you really aren't going to be the only end-all and be-all. You can only derive information from your sources, from vendors, without the vendor giving you too much of a tight, restrictive spec, but vendors can be a wealth of information. In the service and public works bid specification area, you really do want to know how and when the work is to be performed and put that in your spec, often called the scope of work. What supplies, equipment, or materials will be necessary to complete the work? How will payment be made? Will there be pay-for-progress payments? Those are when I get this part of the job done, you pay me a third, and then when I get this part of the job done, you pay me another third, and then when it's all done, you pay me everything less 10%, and then until everything is ironed out and you look at everything, you hold back the 10%. That's sometimes done. That's often done in major architectural kinds of contracts, not so much in labor, more of the school district service type things, but it could be. It could be done. Hourly rate, price per job, time and material costs, these are all potential pricing points. You need to tell the vendor how to price it. You're not going to tell me how you're going to price it. You want them to say, okay, for instance, the security guards that you want to hire, the hourly rate is going to be such and such per man or woman, and that's the nature of what you're going to do for the number of hours that you anticipated, and so your total bid is going to be $157,225. That's the pricing point that you want for security guards. Or price per job on, let's say you're doing the concrete work and you want to have an installation of the concrete. You want to specify, well, we're going to need 535 square yards at this location and 1,050 square yards at this location, and ultimately the vendor is going to provide labor and the cost of the materials together in a job price. So you're going to see a total price of $5,275 for the job from that vendor, and that's going to be what you compare to other vendors. Time and materials is a little different. That's going to be an hourly rate and then a materials discount usually, often a percentage discount off of the manufacturer listings of the price of materials. So, for instance, if you're going to have roofing labor, you're going to need to kind of get an estimate of how many hours the roofing is going to take, but you're going to ask for the price for labor and the materials separately. So all of these are different things to consider when you're determining what you're going to be doing in terms of your public works or service contract. So the specification is really, really important. The better you are at indicating specification, the better you are going to be at getting what you need to get this job done. There's nothing less fun than putting out all this work and then putting out a spec that doesn't work and having to redo the entire bid, all the time and effort that goes into it. So you want to try and get it best you can. But there is another way you can deal with it if you do find out before the bid opens and there's enough time that you've allowed for the bid to be out that you can send out information. You can update using an addendum, which is basically a letter that goes to all the vendors that indicates there's a change to something, or there's an augmentation to a description that would allow them to know what the change is so that you can still get them to get it back to you on the date of the bid opening and try and salvage the bid, because it's as you can all see, there's a lot of work that goes into this. Just looking into the process of how you handle a bid opening, you certainly, as we talked before, you want to keep those bids safe until the time of the opening. On that particular day and time, and there should be a room where you can do this, large enough to accommodate whoever's going to come to the opening. Vendors used to come a lot to purchase bids. They don't do that nearly as often, I find, these days, but they do come to all the labor bids. Seems like they're very interested in that. And then you want to have them sitting there as you are going to read some information. I would have another person from business office there to record while you read, so you always want to have an additional person there as a witness if you should ever need one. And then you want to read the bidder name, the total price submitted, the existence of a signature on the non-collusive certification, and the presence or not of bid security if you require it. Those are usually required in public works contracts. As we talked about in our last session, you can take an electronic bid. You really have to have a Board of Education resolution and the software to handle them so that they're indeed considered sealed bids and not open to public perusal. All of those certified checks or bid bonds. And I say certified checks, that's what the law says. Reality is people don't do certified checks anymore. It's very hard to get a certified check from a bank, but they do bank checks that are can be guaranteed, can be deposited if you do that, and certainly if something should bounce, you would then not have valid bid security from that vendor, and you'd know that. And then you want to get those bid security checks or bonds returned to the unsuccessful bidders so that they don't have their money tied up irresponsibly because they're not going to win the award anyway. And in the process of bid analysis, you have to make a determination of how you're going to award the bid, which we've talked about. And then when you do that, you then really need to look at the individual bid items on a line-by-line analysis. So each item is looked at to determine who the lowest bidder is. If you're dealing with a group of bid items, then you'd need to note what the unit price was, multiply it out by the quantities, and then add all of the items within a group together, total, and then that number be compared to each of the vendors. And then, of course, if all items are going to be used to determine the award, then you would want to make sure you extend all that pricing, make sure it's all totaled into one number, and then compare those numbers across the board. Most of the time, unless it's a bid with very, very few items, it's usually done on a line-by-line analysis basis, not the first item noted. And you should really tell the vendors how you're going to do it in advance so they're aware of it. You want to take the items that you have questions about. Some will be very straightforward. Some you will have questions about it. And you want to look at those alternates that are being suggested. Sometimes it'll be very clear the vendor has an alternate. Sometimes you may have to ask the vendor what they're doing. But their paperwork, their bid document should tell you what it is that they're, what catalog number, what brand, that sort of thing. You may ask for some kind of sample or spec review to make sure that you know what you're getting. Sometimes that can be done by looking at a cut sheet of a description of what the product is and finding out they're bidding 50-pound paper, not 90-pound paper, and that's what you specified. But you have to make sure you've got the specification there to say it's 90 pounds. If it just said paper, 18 by 24, you don't really have a leg to stand on unless the paper is green and you needed white and you said white. In the case of tie bids, you only can select one vendor, and basically you can make your own little philosophy up, but basically the law says you can award to anyone you want. Some people award to the one that's furthest away, thinking you're getting the best deal on the transportation fee that's incorporated into their cost. But technically, you really can award to whoever you so desire. If you do reject a bid from a vendor on a line, you really should make a notation as to what the rationale was for that rejection. The item was bid incorrectly. The item had the item does not meet specs because of, and whatever the reason is, so that if anyone ever picks up the information that you're working from, your worksheets, that there would be no question that you had a rationale for it and that was a valid rationale for it. On some of the computer systems that now exist, there are places where you can put your rationale right onto the computer, which is a handy thing, because then anybody looking at that can say, all right, so they did a review and they saw that this item is not meeting the spec because it doesn't have XYZ on it, that they were able to put that in. Then once you're kind of getting to the point that you're really finishing your analysis and you've got the items that you think are the low bid awards, you got to watch out for vendor minimums. That's when a vendor on their bid document, and you've got to review the bid documents themselves, because there's information in those that you need to know. For instance, if they're not holding your prices for the time frame that you need them held, you need to deal with that, perhaps by either rejecting them or telling them that you're going to reject them. Do they want to rescind it? You might have a minimum, which is what this is talking about, where they say, you know, each location has to have a delivery of at least $90, and as you scan your location's awards, you may see that that's not going to work, and you can again disqualify their bids or ask them if they wanted to rescind their requirement. And I would caution here that if you do a request to rescind, you be very consistent and not rescind it on some vendors and not or give them an opportunity to rescind on some vendors and not on all, because you really need to do that. And if they do rescind it, they've got to put it in writing, which you attach to the bid, and make sure that everything is kosher. There are no questions. And when we talk about the award being to the lowest responsible bidder, this means something very, very specific. Responsive means that these are vendors who are capable of handling the contract. If you have a whole lot of documentation that says that this vendor has not been responsive, i.e. they haven't delivered on time, and you've put it in writing to them, you may be able to reject them based on that information. Responsible means that they're actually meeting the specifications that you've put out there, so that they're doing what you've asked them to do in their terms, and your terms and conditions are being met. So you want to be very, very aware of the fact that if you are deeming someone not responsive and not responsible, that can have an impact on their reputation. So that you really do want to be aware of that and not do that arbitrarily, because it is meaningful, especially to the vendors. And you want the vendors to be aware of the fact, especially if it's a total award bid. You want to give them an opportunity to know that there was an issue and that you have to make a decision based on the information you have. And then the recommendation that's made to the board is usually with a list of the vendors, the number of items, the cost, the number of no bids where, you know, nobody responded to those items, which may have to be rebid, or most likely one of two things have happened. Either the type of vendor that would respond wasn't accessed, or the bids, the items are not really very clear, or actually there's a third one, or they're not being made anymore, and so you can't get those items. So you would have had to get a change to the spec in order to put out something that was similar. The date and the location of the legal notice, i.e. what paper or papers did that legal notice get advertised in, and anything else that your Board of Education may feel is appropriate. By the way, that list I just gave you may not match what you do. That is really that's the decision of the Board of Education. So whatever they're looking for is what you need to present to them, and whatever they're looking for is usually what they've done in the past. And then, of course, you can certainly send the purchase order out then. Just to take another moment in this purchasing process to look at what happens, under what circumstances do you actually disqualify a bid. And sometimes a bid disqualification is based on an item, so the rest of the vendor's responses to the bids are fine, and that you may award a piece of the bid to that vendor. You may award them 50 art supplies, but on this particular item, it doesn't meet the specification because the alternate's not equal in form or function or anything that you specified. You could reject the bidder and that entire bid, based on the lack of a signature or the submission of a statement of non-collusion. And if that's true, I found in my experience that the lawyers will indicate that that's something that could be waived, that there was you can get that signed before the board is given their before the board actually is given their recommendation, and I would just have the vendor come right in and have that taken care of. The bidder doesn't supply required bid security or doesn't meet the minimum insurance requirements, then you can reject them straight out. You would have to, I would contact my legal person if there was a question about whether I could ask for the bid security at a time before the bid was sent to the board. Or, you know, the bidder could be highly documented for failure to deliver or perform. And then if there's anything else that's out there, you should really talk to your lawyers. And I say that knowing even the above, if you have a question before you disqualify a vendor, you probably want to ask the attorney to take a look at the situation, because they're safeguarding the district liabilities as well as you. So you want to make sure you feel, you know, comfortable with that. I know we're starting to run out of time. I only have a couple more pages I think we can get through very quickly. Bid withdrawal can be permitted in a couple of instances. I'm not going to read these to you, but these are some of the instances where you can withdraw the bid, or the vendor can withdraw the bid. But it has to be under certain, you know, it's not like, oh, gee whiz, I don't really feel like that we did a good price on that. Could you, you know, just let us come out of it, because we're not really, we really don't want to be that low. It has to be something that they could document in writing. And you want to get that in writing, because everything we do is document, document, document. So I can't say that enough, and I think I probably have said it enough so that everybody knows what's going on with that. And of course, you don't want to let them withdraw unless it's, you know, not going to hurt the district, because you don't want to take a vendor who had a bid that was very viable, and then, you know, you have to go out and rebid the whole job again. So you got to think about what's going on. And again, you may have your legal people involved. When you do that, you need to reject the bid and return any of the bid security that was received. And you could go on to award to the next bidder as long as the bid actually hasn't been awarded. And you can also rebid the entire bid. It depends on what the situation is and what your feelings are on that. But absolutely under no condition can you negotiate with the original low bidder and have him change his price in any way. For instance, if his bid was $50,200 and he wants to make it right by going, oh, I don't know, $3,000 higher to just come in under the $54,000 from the next lowest bidder, you can't do that. You can reject him and go to the $54,000, but you can't play games with the low bidder. So hopefully this gave you all insight into the purchasing process. And if there are any questions, I'd be certainly happy to try and respond to them. There's a lot of information that we covered. And, of course, next time we're going to be talking in a little more detail as to the actual components of the contracts that go out and how this all becomes the legal issue that we use to be able to do our buying. Thank you all for attending today. And Matthew, if there are any questions, I certainly am here.
Okay, great. If anyone has any questions for Angela, please hit 7# on your phone. That'll notify me that you want to speak to her, and I'll put you right through. I'll give you a couple seconds to go ahead and do that. Thank you.
I see Michael Robinson asked for a question. Matthew, you're answering that.
All right, we got 2 questions.
Okay, I don't see them.
No, it's voice questions. So,
Okay.
first is from Paul. Paul, go ahead.
It's Pat, but
Oh, Paul.
first question.
Sorry.
That's all right. There's two questions. Regarding the intergovernmental purchasing agreement, is it correct that there only needs to be 2 interested parties? For example, a BOCES and a fire district.
I believe so.
Okay.
It only has to be 2.
And the other question was, are charter schools considered to be a school district?
You know, Pat, I'm not really sure. That's a good question. I don't know, but I'll try and find out and get some information over.
Okay, and I'll send you an email with the question too, just so you'll have it in a hard copy.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Marcia, go ahead.
My question's really quite simple. I would like to download the information that you had on the screen, but I don't know the connection.
An email was sent out this morning, so check
It'll be on that?
first.
Okay.
Sometimes our email, for some reason, gets caught up in spam. Otherwise, I'll type in the chat here my email address. Go ahead and email me, and I'll send it right over to you.
I'm not seeing it in here.
I'm typing it as we speak.
Wait a minute. One was forwarded to me. Yep, I've got it.
Okay.
My presentations tend to be a little more on the wordier side because I like to give you guys almost an idea of what the a manual would look like, and to give you as much detail as I can on where you can find resources for things, because I think as you get more and more into purchasing, you need to have as many resources as you possibly can.
Okay, we have no other questions. Thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you back here on the 24th, 1 week from now. Angela, thank you, and everyone have a great day.
You're quite welcome. Have a good day.